Okay, so if I asked you to picture the ultimate intellectual from the 18th century, the absolute peak of the French Enlightenment, what comes to mind?
You're probably thinking of some very serious man, right? Powdered wig, big mahogany library.
Totally. Writing these incredibly dense books on geometry or something. And to be fair, there were a lot of those guys.
There were.
Yeah.
But the man we're talking about today, he breaks that mold so completely. It's almost disorienting.
It really is. I mean, we are talking about the man who basically tried to back up the internet onto paper in 1700s.
Exactly. And he's often remembered, in history class as this dry, stuffy encyclopedist. But in reality, he was a bohemian rebel, a prisoner, and this is the best part, he wrote a best-selling novel about talking jewelry.
We are 100% going to get to the talking jewelry, because when I first read that in the sources, I was sure it was a typo. We're talking, of course, about Denis Diderot. And I think for a lot of people, and I'll include myself here before this dive, Diderot is just another name on the list. You get Voltaire, you get Rousseau, and Diderot's just kind of stuck in the middle.
Right. But the more you look into it, the more you realize he wasn't just on the list, he was the guy who built the list. He was the engine room.
That's a great way to put it, the engine room.
It's the perfect analogy, I think. If you imagine the Enlightenment as a band, Voltaire is the lead singer. He's charismatic, he's famous, he's playing to the crowd.
And Rousseau is the moody songwriter.
The tortured artist, exactly.
Huh.
But Diderot was the producer. He was the one in the studio connecting the instruments, mixing the sound, making sure the entire thing didn't just fall apart. He was connecting art and science and philosophy and industry in a way that, well, it'd never been done before.
But his life was so volatile, it wasn't like a quiet, behind-the-scenes job. This is a guy who was disowned by his own father, who was putting together this massive encyclopedia while basically dodging the 18th century version of the FBI.
And he had to hide his best work. Just shove it in a drawer for his entire life.
Which is really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? We want to figure out how one man tried to compile all of human knowledge.
And why he had to live this strange double life as a public intellectual and a secret radical.
And this is the part that just blew my mind, how he somehow predicted evolutionary theory a full century before Charles Darwin.
It's an incredible story.
So let's set the scene a little bit. We're in 18th century France, the age of enlightenment, the age of reason. But I want to kind of push back on that reason label. Was it really that reasonable? What was the actual vibe?
The vibe was more like a battlefield, honestly. It was less a vibe and more just extreme tension. You've got these two massive tectonic plates grinding against each other.
Okay.
On one side, you have the absolute unquestionable authority of the king and the Catholic Church. They control everything, the press, the schools, the prisons, everything.
And on the other side,
you have this new rising tide of scientific skepticism. People are starting to say, hey, don't just tell me what the Bible says about the stars. Let me, actually look through this telescope and see for myself.
So it's a conflict between dogma and direct observation.
Exactly. And Denis Diderot is born right into the middle of this friction. And he didn't start out as some fancy philosopher. He's born in a town called Langres, and his dad was a master cutler.
He made knives.
He made knives, which feels really important, right?
It does. He wasn't born into the aristocracy. He was born in a workshop. He came from a world of making things.
Of tools and sharp edges. It's crucial to who he becomes. He was brilliant, though. He was educated by the Jesuits, got his Master of Arts from the University of Paris in 1732, but then he hits this classic crossroads.
The family expectation.
Exactly. His father, the knife maker, wants him to have a stable life. Go be a lawyer or a priest.
The classic get a real job speech. And I take it Diderot wasn't interested.
He said, no, thank you. In 1734, he tells his dad he wants to be a writer. His father is absolutely furious, disowns him.
Just like that, cuts him off.
Cuts him off completely. So for the next 10 years, Diderot is living this. Well, the sources call it a bohemian existence in Paris.
Which sounds romantic, but I'm guessing it was mostly just being poor.
It was. The images of him wandering around, broke, wearing a worn-out coat, drinking coffee at the Café de la Régence, watching other people play chess because he couldn't afford to play.
And this is when he meets Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
It is. They're these two young, hungry outsiders together, the bad boys of the intellectual scene. But Diderot has a problem that philosophy can't really solve.
Rent.
And he's complicated his life in a big way. In 1743, he marries a woman named Antoinette Champion.
And his father hated her too, right?
Oh, passionately. She was a devout Catholic, she was uneducated, and she had no dowry. From his father's perspective, it was a disaster of a match.
So the marriage was strained from the start.
Let's just say Diderot wasn't exactly a faithful husband. The sources are pretty clear on that.
So he's got a wife, a child, and, as the reading points out, a very demanding mistress, Madeleine de Puisieux. The pressure must have been immense.
Massive financial pressure.
Yep.
Which brings us to probably the weirdest origin story for a major philosophical work I have ever heard. He didn't write his first hit to enlighten the world.
He wrote it for the money.
He did. The story goes, he told his mistress that writing a novel was trivial, that it was easy. And she basically said, oh yeah, prove it.
So he does. In 1748, he cranks out this book, Les Bijoux Indiscrets, the indiscreet jewels.
Okay, we have to unpack this plot.
Yeah.
Because the title sounds like a mystery about a diamond heist or something.
It is not. Jewels here is a very specific euphemism.
A very specific one. Discreet jewel was 18th century slang for the vagina.
Right. So the plot is, a sultan gets a magic ring, and when he points this ring at any woman,
Jewel.
starts talking.
It starts talking.
It speaks. And it confesses all of the woman's sexual experiences, all her secrets. So on the surface, this is just straight up 18th century smut. It's scandalous, it's bawdy. Is that all it is? Is this just Diderot selling out to pay his bills, or is there something deeper going on?
That is the classic Diderot move. He can't help himself. Yes, it's a satire of the French court. The Sultan is pretty clearly King Louis the Atheist. But underneath all the smut, he's sneaking in his real philosophy.
Which is what?
Materialism. He's arguing that people aren't driven by these lofty morals or some immaterial soul. They're driven by their biology, by their physical urges.
The sources mention a specific scene, a dream sequence. The Sultan sees a giant child named Experiment.
Yes. This child, Experiment, is growing bigger and stronger, and eventually he just smashes this huge temple called Hypothesis.
It's such a brilliant metaphor to hide in a sex comedy.
Isn't it? He's saying that the scientific method, actual experimentation, real observation, is going to crush the old dogmatic ways of thinking. The hypothesis, he's basically shouting, look at the real world, look at real bodies, don't just trust these abstract theories you've been fed.
So he sells the scandal, but he's hiding the medicine inside it. And it worked, didn't it? It made him a lot of money.
It was a huge underground bestseller.
Yeah.
But the authorities were watching. And they could, tolerate a bit of smut, but they could not tolerate what he did next.
The next year, 1749, he writes Letter on the Blind.
This feels like such a hard pivot. He goes from talking vaginas to this really serious philosophical treatise on blindness. Is there a connection?
It looks like a pivot, but it's the same argument in a different costume. In the dirty novel, he argues that our bodies drive our behavior. In Letter on the Blind, he just takes the concept of the soul completely out of the equation.
How does he do that? He centers it on a real person, a blind English mathematician named Nicholas Saunderson. And Diderot asks a very, very dangerous question. How does a blind man perceive God?
And the standard answer at the time would have been the argument from design.
Right, the watchmaker argument. You look at a flower, you look at a sunset, it's so complex, so beautiful, it must have had a divine creator.
But Saunderson can't see the sunset.
Exactly. Diderot has Saunderson say, basically, I can't see this glorious sunset you're talking about. I can't see the glory of God written in the stars. I only know the world through what I can touch. So he rejects the idea of a designed universe. Instead, he argues for something he calls thinking matter.
And this is where it gets really radical. This is where the source material says he starts predicting evolution. How specific does he get here? It's 1749.
It is startlingly specific.
Wow, yeah.
Saunderson argues that nature isn't some perfect finished creation. He suggests that nature just turns out variations, blindly. It just makes stuff.
Yeah, most of it doesn't work.
Most of it is what he calls monsters, biological failures that just die out immediately. And only the viable ones, the ones that are functional, survive and go on to reproduce.
Wait a minute. So he's describing natural selection.
He's effectively describing natural selection, yes.
Yeah.
He's suggesting that order arises from chaos over vast stretches of time, not from a divine blueprint. And in 1749 France, that is not a scientific theory.
That's atheism.
It's atheism. And atheism is sedition. It's a crime against the state.
So, okay, let me push back on the heroic rebel thing for a second. Diderot has to know what he's doing here. He is publishing atheist arguments in a Catholic absolute monarchy. He's directly attacking the foundation of the state's power. Did he really think he was going to get away with it?
That's a great question. I don't think he was naive, but he might have been a bit arrogant. I mean, you have to remember,
Yeah.
Paris was flooded with underground literature. It was everywhere. Diderot probably thought he was just one more voice in a huge, noisy crowd.
He didn't realize he'd become the loudest voice.
He'd become the loudest voice,
Ugh.
and the crackdown was swift.
Very swift. July 1749, the police just kicked down his door.
They search his place, they confiscate his manuscripts, and they haul him off to the dungeon at Vincennes.
And this is not house arrest. We're talking solitary
Yeah,
confinement.
it was brutal. Total isolation. But this is where you get a real sense of his character. He was so desperate to write, to think, that he starts improvising.
Right. He only had one book with him, Paradise Lost.
And he scrapes sleet from the walls, mixes it with the wine they gave him to make ink, and uses a sharpened toothpick as a pen.
That's incredible dedication. But the experience, it did break him, didn't it?
It did. After months in there, he realized that being a stubborn martyr wasn't going to work. He had to sign a submission. He had to confess that he wrote the jewels and the letter on the blind and promise he wouldn't write any more debaucheries of the mind.
And they let him out.
They let him out in November 1749. And this is such a pivotal moment. He walks out of that prison with a choice. He can go back to being a quiet translator, keep his head down.
Or he can fight back. But he knows now he can't fight openly.
He has to be cunning. He realizes that if he really wants to change the world, he can't just write these little pamphlets that the government is just going to burn. He needs to build something bigger, something that looks official, but secretly contains the seeds of revolution.
And this is where the Encyclopédie comes in.
This is the Encyclopédie.
Now, when we hear Encyclopedia today, we think of Wikipedia, or maybe those old dusty books in the school library. It just seems so harmless. Why was a dictionary a revolutionary weapon in the 18th century?
Well, context is everything. Because originally it wasn't supposed to be revolutionary at all. It was just a business venture. A publisher, André Le Breton, wanted to translate an English dictionary, Chamber Encyclopedia, into French, just to make a quick buck.
But Diderot gets involved, and he has bigger ideas?
He basically hijacks the entire project. He doesn't just want to define words. He brings in the mathematician Jean-Laurent d'Alembert as his co-editor, and their goal, in Diderot's own words, was to change the common way of thinking.
Okay, but how do you do that in practice? If you're writing an encyclopedia that has to be approved by the king's censors, you can't just write an entry for God that says doesn't exist. So how do you sneak the radical ideas in?
This is the absolute genius of it. They created a system of cross-references, envois they called them. It was like a paper version of a hyperlink. So you would look up a very safe, standard article, let's say Christianity, and the text of that article would be completely orthodox, very respectful. The censor reads it, nods, stamps it, approved.
But that's not the whole story.
No, because at the bottom of the page, there's a tiny note. It says, see also, cannibalism.
You're kidding me.
Not at all. Or an entry on a group of monks might have a cross-reference that just says, see also, insects. They created this whole subversive web where the real argument, the real critique, was hidden in the connections between the articles. Diderot didn't just write a book. He designed an information architecture that forced you to think.
That's so modern. It's like hiding the important code in the comment section where nobody looks. But beyond just the subversion, the scale of this thing is mind-boggling. Diderot wrote something like 7,000 articles himself. 7,000. And remember where he came from. He's the son of a knife maker. He didn't just sit in a library and write about philosophy. He went out into the workshops. He spent days with weavers, with glassblowers, with tanners. He learned how to make gunpowder just so he could write about it accurately.
And I think that's a point we often miss. You know, in the 18th century, there was this massive class divide. Thinking was for the rich people, and making things was for the poor people.
And Diderot just smashes that wall down. He believes that the mechanical arts, the trades, were just as noble and important as theology or philosophy. By putting a detailed diagram of a stocking loom right next to an article on the nature of the soul, he was leveling the playing field of knowledge.
He was secularizing it. He was saying that human progress comes from industry and science, not just from prayer and kings.
Which, of course, the establishment absolutely hated.
It must have been a magnet for controversy, constantly. It was banned by the king in 1752. Then it was reinstated because it was making too much money. Then it was banned by the Pope in 1758. Then the government suppressed it completely in 1759.
Just imagine working on a project for 20 years and the government's constantly trying to shut you down, to burn your work. It's insane. And his partner, D'Alembert, He eventually quits. He can't take the pressure.
But Diderot stays. He calls himself the captain of the ship, trying to steer this massive illegal project through hostile waters. He just keeps going, writing, editing, managing hundreds of contributors. But there is a really heartbreaking twist at the very end of the story.
This part of the source material just made me so angry on his behalf. So it's 1764. He's been at this for almost 2 decades. He's finally finishing the proof sheets for the last volumes, and he finds something wrong.
He discovers that his own publisher, Le Breton, the guy who started the whole thing, who was making a fortune from it, had panicked. Le Breton was terrified of getting thrown in the best deal. So secretly, after Diderot had done the final edits for the day, Le Breton and his foreman went through the proofs and just cut out anything they thought was too dangerous.
They censored him. Behind his back.
And they didn't just cross things out, they burned the original manuscripts.
Oh.
So Diderot discovers that his life's work has been, in his words, irreparably mutilated. He felt the entire project was a waste, 20 years of his life, and he felt like he'd failed because the final version was this neutered, censored thing.
Which is so tragic because even in its censored form, the Encyclopédie was a bombshell. It helped pave the way for the French Revolution. But for him, personally, it was a betrayal.
A huge betrayal.
Yeah.
And I think that experience, the prison, the constant censorship, his own publisher gutting his work, that's what pushes him into this double life.
Right. He realizes that if he wants to write what he really thinks, his pure, unfiltered ideas, he can't publish them. Not while he's alive. It's just too dangerous. So he starts writing for the drawer.
I love that concept. He basically gives up on his own time and decides to place a bet on the future. On us.
He had that amazing quote, "Posterity is for the philosopher what the other world is for the man of religion."
He stopped caring about reviews in Paris and started writing for an audience in 2026. And the works he hid in that drawer, they are his absolute masterpieces.
Let's get into a few of them because they are just wild. The first one is The Nun, La Religieuse. And this started out as a prank.
A very elaborate practical joke, yes. In 1760, Diderot and some friends wanted to lure a buddy of theirs, the Marquis de Croixmare, back to Paris from his country estate. So they invented a fake nun. They started sending the Marquis these desperate letters from a nun who claimed she was being held in a convent against her will and needed his help to get out.
That is just so manipulative and so extra.
It's very extra. But as Diderot is writing these letters, creating this voice for this young woman, he gets completely sucked into this story. It stops being a joke, and it starts becoming a novel.
And the novel's protagonist, Suzanne, she's forced into the convent by her parents.
Right, because she's illegitimate. Her mother is trying to pay for her own sin of adultery by sacrificing her daughter to the church.
And the stuff she goes through in the convent is not just, I'm bored. It's dark. It's about abuse, psychological torture, sexual repression.
It's a blistering critique of the whole system. Diderot is arguing that when you lock people away from society, you violate their nature. And that isolation creates this toxic, abusive hierarchy. Suzanne has one mother superior who abuses her physically, and then another one at a different convent who's a lesbian and tries to seduce her, eventually going mad from her own repressed desires.
It's an argument that cloistered life is dehumanizing. And of course, that stayed in the drawer. If he'd published that, he would have been straight back in Vincennes.
Immediately, without a doubt. And then you have what many people think is his greatest work, Rameau's Nephew.
This one is a dialogue, right? A conversation between a character named Diderot and this real-life guy, the nephew of a famous composer.
Jean-François Rameau. And this character, the nephew, he's fascinating. He's basically the anti-Diderot.
How so?
He's a mooch. He's a parasite, a total cynic. He's brilliant and talented, but completely lazy. He believes in absolutely nothing except satisfying his own appetites. His philosophy is, why be good? It doesn't pay. I'd rather have a full belly.
So he's a direct challenge to that whole Enlightenment idea that nature is fundamentally good, the way Rousseau saw it.
A complete challenge. The nephew basically argues that in nature, species eat each other. And in society, men eat each other using laws and money. He's a pure hedonist. He says, hurrah for wisdom, to drink good wines, gorge on choice foods, tumble pretty women.
And what's so compelling is that the Diderot character in the book doesn't really win the argument.
He doesn't. Diderot, the author, allows this awful, cynical character to make incredibly good points. It shows that he was willing to debate himself, to seriously question his own most cherished values.
And the journey of this manuscript is just as crazy as the content.
It's a miracle we even have it. The original manuscript was lost. It was found, smuggled to Russia, given to the German poet Schiller, who gave it to Goethe. Goethe loved it so much he translated it into German in 1805.
And the French had to retranslate it back from German?
Years later, they had to retranslate the German version back into French because the original was still lost. It just shows you how precarious this entire legacy was.
And then, quickly, there's Jacques the Fatalist. The plot is complex, but the style feels incredibly modern. He's breaking the fourth wall constantly.
Long before it was cool.
Yeah.
It's a novel that knows it's a novel. Diderot just stops the story to talk directly to you, the reader. He makes fun of the cliches of novels. He'll say something like, I could make the characters get into a sword fight right now, but that seems boring, so I won't.
He's playing with the idea of determinism. Are our lives written in advance, like a book?
Exactly. And he's exploring that idea by constantly reminding you that he is literally writing the book you're reading. It anticipates postmodernism by 200 years. It's incredible.
So you've got the smutty satirist, the encyclopedist, the secret radical novelist. But we can't talk about Diderot without talking about his patron, because for a guy who hated authority, he got very, very close to one of the most powerful autocrats in the world.
Empress Catherine the Great of Russia.
This relationship is just so bizarre. So Diderot is famous, but he's still broke. He needs to come up with a dowry for his daughter. And Catherine hears about this.
Well, Catherine was kind of collecting European intellectuals like they were trading cards. She wanted to be seen as an enlightened despot. She wanted the credibility that came from hanging out with the French philosophers.
So she makes him an offer.
An incredible offer. She offers to buy his entire personal library for a huge sum, 15,000 livres.
Which is a fortune back then.
A life-changing amount of money. But here's the kicker. She tells him he can keep all the books. She then appoints him as the salaried caretaker of his own library.
That's the greatest arts grant of all time. Here's a ton of money and you can keep all your stuff.
It completely saved him financially. But there was a catch. Eventually, she wanted to meet the man she was bankrolling. So in 1773, Diderot, who hates to travel and is getting older, has to make this long, miserable trek all the way to St. Petersburg.
And the meetings they had, they weren't these formal court things. They met almost every day, just the two of them.
Man to man, as he put it. And Diderot, well, Diderot didn't really have a courtly filter. He was an enthusiastic talker.
There's that famous anecdote.
Yes. Catherine wrote that in his excitement, he would get so animated in their conversations that he would keep slapping her on the thighs.
He's slapping the Empress of Russia on the leg.
Repeatedly. She said she had to put a small table between them just to protect her legs from bruising.
That's amazing. But beyond the comedy, there was a real political clash happening there.
A massive one. Diderot, being Diderot, drafted these grand plans for Russia. He told her she should abdicate the throne, give power to the people, create a legal system that applied to everyone equally. He basically pitched a full-blown democracy to an absolute monarch.
And I can imagine how the autocrat of all the Russias responded to that.
She listened politely, smiled, and then completely dismissed it. She had this famous line where she told him his theories were fine for writing on paper, which endures anything, but she had to write on human skin, which is far more ticklish.
Wow, that is a devastatingly effective put-down.
It is. It's basically, that's nice, philosopher, but I have to deal with the real world.
Yeah.
It really shows the limits of the Enlightenment when it came face-to-face with real power.
He didn't change Russia, but he did pretty much invent modern art criticism. We should touch on his salons.
Yes, quickly. Before Diderot, art criticism as a genre didn't really exist. He would go to the big art exhibitions at the Louvre and then write these long, incredibly vivid descriptions for a private newsletter that went out to European royalty.
And since there was no photography, his words had to do all the work.
He had to make you see the painting. He would use his imagination to bring the canvas to life. He'd talk about the composition, the emotion, the lighting. He treated painting like it was a piece of drama.
And speaking of drama, he also came up with the idea of the fourth wall in theater.
He did. He argued that actors should stop playing to the audience, winking and gesturing. He said they should act as if there's an invisible wall between the stage and the seats, and just be completely absorbed in the reality of the scene.
Which is now the standard for realistic acting.
It's the standard. But it was a new idea then. It seems like everywhere you look in the 18th century, Diderot is there, planting some seed that's going to grow into something huge 100 years later.
Evolution, postmodern novels, art criticism, democracy.
But he never got to see any of those trees grow. He died in July 1784, just 5 years before the storming of the Bastille.
And his end was just as chaotic as his life.
It was. Fittingly so. He died of pulmonary thrombosis. The story is his last meal was an apricot, and his last words were, "The first step towards philosophy is incredulity."
Sectacle right to the very end.
But the real chaos came after his death. He was buried in a church, but during the Revolution in 1793, grave robbers broke into the crypts looking for lead to melt down for bullets.
And they just tossed his remains.
His remains were unearthed and most likely just thrown into a mass grave, lost forever.
So the ultimate materialist, the man who believed we are just matter in motion, literally dissolved back into the earth completely anonymously.
It's an incredible irony, but in a way, it fits his own philosophy perfectly. Everything changes, everything passes, nothing remains but the whole.
So let's bring it all together. Why does Diderot matter to us today, to you, listening to this deep dive?
I think Diderot is the patron saint of the deep dive itself. He wasn't a specialist. He wasn't a guy who just stayed in his lane. He was interested in everything.
Yeah.
He validated the idea that you can be deeply curious about how stockings are woven and how the universe began and the right way to act in a play. He just represents the pure joy of learning and connecting things.
And he also represents the resilience of knowledge, right? He fought to keep ideas alive when the most powerful forces in his world wanted to burn them.
Exactly. He worked to democratize knowledge, to take it out of the hands of just the elites and the priests and try to give it to everyone.
It brings us back to his whole idea of immortality. He didn't believe in a soul or an afterlife, but he did believe in the scattering of ideas. He basically put his consciousness into a drawer, hoping that 250 years later would open it up and reassemble him just by reading his words.
And in a way, that's what we've done. Every time you use a cross-reference to check a fact, or you question a piece of dogma, or you look for the connection between art and science, you're kind of putting Diderot back together.
So here's the final thought. Diderot will bet that posterity would be his Evan. Have we, by reading his secret works and by using this vast, interconnected world of knowledge he fought for, have we actually given him the afterlife he wanted? Or, in our modern age of just information overload, have we lost that unity of nature he was trying so hard to find in the first place?